Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're going to begin part 5 of this book, The Global Vatican, and it is entitled Conclusions. What are the conclusions of this book? And before I begin reading the final section of this book, I will back up one paragraph back on page 214 for continuity, and then we will proceed. He says, looking back, the author, Francis Rooney, the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, says in the final paragraph of part 4, looking back at the president's visit, that is his visit to his God in Rome, Benedict XVI, putting the distractive territorial issues behind, both the Holy See and Sant'Egidio have much to offer for the good of the world and can accomplish feats that would be unachievable for territorial sovereigns and others with more hegemonic or less selfless agendas. The author concludes the last section of this book accordingly leaves us to consider what role the Holy See can and may play in international relations and the global diplomacy of the future. So the previous 4 portions of this book has been telling us how the Pope has controlled the kings of the earth, diplomacy, national and international diplomacy, national and international foreign policy and domestic policy for the nations of the world. And now we're going to talk about how the Pope intends to rule the world in the future. Okay. First of all, the author begins by saying that the papacy is not hegemonic. Listen to what he says. He says, looking back at the president's visit, putting the distractive territorial issues behind, this is all about territorial issues. The papacy is all about territorial issues. The papacy is all about his territory. And what does the papacy claim to be his territory? It's displayed even in the crown that he wears. It's a triple crown. And the papacy's not shy to let you know what those crowns represent. The uppermost crown represents the Pope's authority over heaven. The middle crown represents his power over the earth, his territorial dominion of the earth. And also the lower crown represents the papacy's territorial control over hell. That's not a secret. That's openly proclaimed. The papal tiara is called the tiara because it's a triple crown. Tiara meaning 3. And his jurisdiction has been established, according to the papacy, in the fact that Jesus appointed Peter to be the first pope, and the popes are his successors, which is an absolute lie. A demonstrable lie from the very words of Scripture, proven to be a lie. Secondly, because of this supposed donation of Constantine, which is a forgery, which we have covered voluminously here on Inquisition Update, supposedly Emperor Constantine bequeathed to the papacy when he, being the restrainer, left Rome and went to Constantinople, he just left his territorial dominions to the papacy. not only Europe, but the whole world. It's called the Donation of Constantine. Just look it up. It's a forgery. And we have also discussed voluminously here on Inquisition Update the pseudo-Isidorian decretals, the false decretals. They too, all of which are forgeries. Admitted forgeries. Papal researchers have long since discovered they are even clumsy forgeries, and they don't have the weight of law at all. Neither the Donation of Constantine nor the pseudo-Isidorian decretals lend to the Pope 1 square inch of jurisdiction in this world. 1 square inch of territory in this world. And yet the whole world believes the lie and acts according to those lies, consistent and in agreement with those lies. George W. Bush acted according to those lies. Francis Rooney's book proves it. But the papacy is the Antichrist. That's why he resorts to lies. He's the father of lies and the servant of the father of lies, Satan himself. The papacy has not one atom of jurisdiction. Not lawful jurisdiction, only legal jurisdiction. According to man's law, not according to God's law. God's law is immutable. It's unchangeable. God is in control of his creation. It is his creation. And it is only his jurisdiction that God's people are to consider. And so I denounce the papacy and all the civil governments in service to the papacy, including the United States government, as having unlawful jurisdiction over God's creation. The only legitimate form of government is that which rewards good and punishes evil, and that good and that evil is defined strictly by the only lawgiver in the universe, God Almighty. And Jesus literally came to set us free from the bonds of governments of men. And I insist that I be freed to serve Christ and him only. And I advise my listeners to consider likewise. Now, the conclusions of this book. It begins with a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. I will read it and then give you my interpretation of it. It says, religion in America. Now, I'm going to interpret this from a Roman Catholic point of view because that's the thrust of this book. He says, religion in America takes no direct part in the government of society, but nevertheless, it must be regarded as the foremost of the political institutions of that country. For if it does not impart a taste for freedom, it facilitates the use of free institutions. Now let me tell you how Rome would interpret this quote. Roman Catholicism in America takes no direct part in the government of society, which is an abject lie. It takes both a direct and an indirect part in the government of this country. The government of this country, according to Roman Catholic teaching, is that it was founded and formulated by Roman Catholics to make Roman Catholicism free and to make Roman Catholicism the binding governance of this country, to bind every man, woman, and child in this country to be a servant of the Pope. Roman Catholicism takes a direct and an indirect part in the government of our society. He continues, he says, but nevertheless it must be regarded as the foremost of the political institutions of that country. Roman Catholicism, from Rome's point of view, is the foremost of the political institutions in this country. In other words, if there are other political institutions of this country that are not Roman Catholic, they're not legitimate. They're not free. Because Roman Catholicism will not tolerate freedom for heretics. So by inference, Roman Catholicism must subjugate all other institutions. Now it goes on, it says, for if it, that is Roman Catholicism, does not impart a taste for freedom, and let me tell you, they have promoted a taste for freedom in this country. It's all about freedom. We think this country is free, but it's not free. If you've paid any attention to the reading of this book, you know this country is not free, and nor are its people. It says, for if it does not impart a taste for freedom, it facilitates the use of free institutions. Roman Catholicism facilitates the use of free institutions. Now, from a biblical point of view, what is a free institution? A free institution, according to the Bible, is that which is free to worship God and Him alone. That's freedom. We are bound to Christ and to no one else. He has set us free from the institutions of men and given us liberty to worship Christ and to obey Him. That's freedom. And we are led to believe that the institutions of this country are given to ensure our freedom. And yet we are bound as slaves to a Roman Catholic government. And so Rome just simply uses the institutions of our government to bind us all. It facilitates the use. Roman Catholicism facilitates the use of our free institutions. Now, how is it that Rome can continue to use our free institutions to bind us to the Pope and to this papist government? It's simply because the American people don't know that they've been enslaved and to whom they are enslaved. And it's the business of Inquisition Update to teach and to prove to whom we are enslaved, to whom we are unlawfully enslaved. And so that if once again Protestantism becomes the understanding of the American people, we can cast off the chains of this Roman tyrant. And God will help us. But we have to make a break. We cannot serve two masters. I believe God is willing, ready, and able to help us regain the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free. But before He can step in our behalf, He has to know that we won't fight against Him and wish to return to Egypt like the Israelites did. Rome simply taught us from the very beginning that the America was free, and then in the name of that freedom took advantage and used our free institutions to bind us. And the only way it was capable of doing so is because they blinded us to whom we are being bound. Now, I've probably got a unique interpretation of Alexis de Tocqueville's quote, but I've been studying Rome's enslavement of this country and its people for over a decade. And whatever Alexis de Tocqueville meant when he wrote that quote, Rome has a far different interpretation of it. And you need to see how Rome has enslaved you. And once you have, you then have the unction to sever that unwitting association. I wish I could put it in better words, more understandable. But we are no less enslaved in this country than the Israelites were under Pharaoh. And it took a deliverer, a man led of God, to bring those people free. And when he found that man, when he put his words in his mouth, Pharaoh and all of his gods were powerless to stop it. That's what I want for God's people today. The chapter 16, part 5 of the book is entitled Faith and Freedom. The author begins by saying, the morning after President Bush met Pope Benedict XVI at the Vatican, Kathleen and I went to see him and Mrs. Bush off at Fiumicino Airport. I thanked the president for his visit and for the opportunity to be part of his team. Then we stood on the tarmac and watched Air Force One lift off and turn for home. For all the bumps in the road, the visit had been a success. Looking back over my time in Rome more broadly, I felt good about the work we'd done in fulfilling my promise to President Bush to represent him and the country to the best of our abilities. But after several years away from my business and our children, the time had come, as I discussed earlier with the White House, for Kathleen and me to start thinking about returning home. That summer, the Pope decamped, as usual, to Castel Gandolfo in the hills outside Rome. Vatican business was slowed to a crawl, and the quote-unquote canicular heat, to borrow the phrase used by the American consul Jacob Martin 160 years earlier, settled over the city. The pace picked up in September. On November 5th, the White House announced the nomination of my successor, Mary Ann Glendon, a highly regarded Harvard law professor. That just simply means she's an expert at canon law, for those who don't know. Highly regarded Harvard law professor specializing in human rights. I mean, after all, according to the papacy, where do our human rights come from? From the Pope. Otherwise, we have no rights. And when the Pope issues your rights, he can take them away. And that's what this government is all about. So, Mary Ann Glendon, a highly regarded Harvard law professor specializing in human rights, who previously served on President Bush's Commission on Bioethics. So now you know bioethics has everything to do with Rome. It's Rome who determines the ethics of our biology. Okay? That's why every hospital in this country has to conform to a standard ethical practice. And that standard ethical practice is devised by Rome. You can go to a Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, Seventh-day Adventist, whatever hospital, but they have to conform to standard ethics, standard bioethics that comes from the self-styled God of gods in Rome. So this Harvard law professor, Ann Glendon, becomes the successor to the author of this book as the representative of the United States to the Holy See. She's trained in human rights and bioethics. And it says, it was gratifying to know that someone of such caliber would follow me in representing the United States to the Holy See, and that the relationship would be in such capable hands. In the meantime, I still had several months to serve. A standout moment that autumn occurred the day after Dr. Glendon's nomination, November 6, 2007, when King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia visited the Pope at the Vatican. King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. I always ask myself, why was the President of the United States, George W. Bush, such a hand-in-hand, lovey-dovey, cheek-kissing partner with the King of Saudi Arabia? Now you know, they're spiritual brethren. They worship the funky little man in Rome. Together. They have a global agenda. Together. They cooperate together. The Pope, King Abdullah, and George W. Bush. It wasn't just a business relationship. Yes, the Bushes are big in oil, and yes, the Saudis have a lot of oil, but their ties go far beyond the oil. King Abdullah bows to the little man in Rome just like George W. Bush did. It's a big, happy Antichrist family. Now you know why Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States, because they serve the same God. The Antichrist of the Bible, the papacy. The standout moment that autumn occurred the day after Dr. Glendon's nomination, November 6, 2007, when King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia visited the Pope at Rome. This first ever visit, according to this author, the first ever visit by a Saudi monarch to a pope, was evident that the Pope's strong words at Regensburg had promoted rather than discouraged dialogue with Islam. Already the previous May, the United Arab Emirates had established diplomatic relations with the Holy See. Oh, that's right. United Arab Emirates has a formal diplomatic relationship with the Antichrist, just like Saudi Arabia, just like the United States. It's one big, global, happy Antichrist family. It says an important step in Catholic-Muslim relations. Listen, if Roman Catholicism was Christian, what relations would it have with heretics? It's not a Christian organization. He says, now this visit by the Saudi king, who came not simply as a civic leader, but as the guardian of the Islamic holy sites of Mecca and Medina. That's right, it's not just a civil leader, it's a religious leader too, just like the Pope, see? Okay? He came not simply as a civic leader, but as the guardian of the Islamic holy sites of Mecca and Medina, bore even more symbolic importance. As we later phrased it in our cable to the State Department, quote, the most important aspect of the king's visit was the fact that it took place, unquote. The same might be said of the presidents of the United States. The most significant aspect of it is that any president of the United States would go to Rome and kiss the Pope's ring. To me, that's more extraordinary than a Saudi king. I mean, after all, heretics should have a common bond. What part doth righteousness have with unrighteousness? If the American government be righteous, what part does it have with the Holy See in Rome? That's been my point throughout this entire book. It's nothing to be lauded. It's nothing to be respected. It's nothing to be praised. It is the downfall of this country. It is the downfall of the body of Christ that we allow our government to have a relationship, such a relationship with the man of sin. And because of that relationship, you and I are enslaved to him with or without our knowledge or consent. I want my liberty. We'll be back right after this.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. If you'd like to support Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who pays the bills. And if you wish to contact me directly, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. Now, the Pope and King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia discussed a number of topics of mutual concern. Yes, there is mutual concern between the heretics of Saudi Arabia and the heretic of the world, the Pope. Tom, you really shouldn't talk that way about the Pope, should you? I mean, after all, he's a Christian, isn't he? Isn't he? No. He's a heretic. It's a religion built around the ancient Babylonian mysticisms with a little bit of Christianity thrown in on the top to just deceive the whole world. Anybody who takes the time to look into what Roman Catholicism is can full well understand why there is mutual concern between the papacy and Saudi Arabia. They are mirror images of one another. Islam has its Sharia law, just like Roman Catholicism has its canon law. It's both anti-Christian, anti-Christ. It seeks an earthly kingdom to overthrow the heavenly one that has precedence, beginning at the Garden of Eden. They both seek to overthrow God's throne. They have a mutual concern, and that is a global government, a global earthly government. They together want to cast off the bond between God and his creation, man. They both have a common goal for the world and a common destiny for its people. Global rebellion against the Creator. Yes, there is mutual concern between King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia and the Pope of Rome. The Pope and the King discussed a number of topics of mutual concern, including the treatment of some 1.6 million quote-unquote Christians in Saudi Arabia, 80% of whom are Catholic. Let me ask you something. Why do Catholics want to live in Saudi Arabia? 80 million of them. Or rather 80% of the 1.6 million. Why would Catholics... Well, you might ask yourself the same question in the colonial period. Why would Catholics move to Protestant USA, the Protestant colonies? To get control of it. To fulfill the donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals. There's no kingdom on this earth that's effectively going to separate itself from the bondage of Rome. And it's the bounden duty of every Roman Catholic to see to it that its country serves the Pope and obeys its laws. That's why there are 1.6 million Christians in Saudi Arabia, 80% of whom are Roman Catholics. I wonder if they have their own Saudi Arabian version of Charles, Daniel, and John Carroll. Or if they even need the likes. Nonetheless, Rome is going to control Saudi Arabia. Rome already does control Saudi Arabia. And it says these Christians were forbidden to practice their faith publicly. Okay? Just like it was in the colonial period, right? Catholics were suppressed. They weren't allowed to practice their diabolical mass and crucify Christ afresh. They weren't allowed to convert the loyalty of the people of the nation to the Pope. Because, see, that's the bounden spiritual duty of every Roman Catholic, to be first bound to the Pope, a servant of the Pope. No Roman Catholic can be a Saudi Arabian, just like no Roman Catholic can be truly an American. Because their first loyalty must be to the Pope, the man of sin. And they have a spiritual obligation in that church to Catholicize the nation, every nation. The same imperative of Roman Catholics in the United States is exercised in Saudi Arabia. Now he says these Christians were forbidden to practice their faith publicly. A particular hardship for Catholics who are supposed to regularly receive sacraments from the clergy. The Mass, that's what he's talking about. They weren't allowed to conduct the Mass in Saudi Arabia, just like they weren't allowed to conduct the Mass here in the colonial USA. He says the Vatican did not expect an instant reversal in the religious policies of Saudi Arabia, but it did hope for greater tolerance for Christians, that is, Catholics. In the meantime, the Pope and the King found common ground in exalting the important role of morality in public affairs. Imagine Saudi Arabia and the Vatican coming to terms on morality. Imagine that. Morality in public affairs, and in agreeing on the need for dialogue among Christian, Muslims, and Jews. What dialogue do I need with Rome, or with Islam, or with Judaism. Judaism rejects Christ. In Judaism, you are bound with a rabbinical curse if you study the book of Daniel. And particularly Daniel chapter 9, which predicts almost to the very day Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan by John the Baptist, making him the Messiah and the fulfillment of the 70th week of Daniel. Judaism issues a rabbinical curse. The rabbis curse any Jew who studies the book of Daniel. That's why the Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah. I have no dialogue with Christianity as defined by Rome, nor with Islam as defined by Muhammad, nor Judaism as defined by the Babylonian priests of Israel. Christ rejectors, every single one of them. The Pope and the King found common ground in exalting the important role of morality in public affairs and in agreeing on the need for dialogue among Christians, which you must read Catholics, because true Bible-believing Christians are not going to be accepted by Rome, nor by Islam, nor by Judaism. We're separated from the world, both as a matter of faith and conscience and practice. We are driven into exile by both Roman Catholicism, Islam, and Judaism. Persecuted around the world for our stand for Jesus Christ. We proclaim him the Creator, the Lawgiver, the King, the Priest, and Savior. We're not going to be tolerated in this world. Catholicism does not tolerate us. Islam does not tolerate us. Neither do the Jews tolerate us. You ever hear the expression Judeo-Christian religion? How can that be? I'll tell you what the Judeo-Christian religion is. It's the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it has absolutely nothing to do with Judaism, nor Roman Catholicism. You see how they have so confused the world? There are very few Christians in this country that can give you the distinction, that can explain the diametric distinction between Christianity, biblical Christianity, the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and this thing called Roman Catholicism. Now, Rome, having been accepted all over the world as Christian, is now going to unite Christians, Muslims, and Jews. That's the ecumenical movement. No, it wasn't just about absorbing the Protestants, those who protested Rome, absorbing them back into the Roman Catholic Church. No, it's to throw you into a global lump of religious hobo stew, worshiping any god by any name, by any practice, so long as you observe the jurisdiction of the Pope. As long as you obey papal law, Roman Catholic canon law, the donation of Constantine, the pseudo-Isidorian decretals. That's what ecumenism really means. It's a global religion, absent of Christ, completely to the exclusion of Jesus Christ. That's what it's all about. He says the Pope conceptualized a new approach toward Islam that fall. As Cardinal Turan told me when I saw him in September, Intent on forging closer relations, Benedict decided to focus on areas in which both religions shared views. Does that sound familiar? That's Vatican Council II. At Vatican Council II, it was decided, well, now that you heretics have repudiated your Protestant Reformation and have agreed to conquer the rest of the world and restore the papacy's dominions that you stole at the Protestant Reformation, we're going to end our visible quarrel, and now we're just going to talk about what unites us. We're not going to talk about doctrine anymore. We're not going to talk about all the things that divided us in the beginning during the Protestant Reformation. We're only going to focus upon those things that we agree on. That's going to be the new religion. The new eclectic religion. The new global religion. And of course, all the Protestants thought that the papacy was only throwing that bone to them. No, he's throwing it to the Muslims too. Okay, we're going to focus on areas in which both religions share views, such as the sanctity of life, culture, and human needs. Never once is the Bible mentioned. Never once is Christ mentioned. They don't agree on Christ. I don't agree with Rome on Christ. The papacy assumes Christ's throne. How can I agree with a Roman Catholic? How can I agree with the papacy? How can I agree with the government of the United States that serves the papacy? What dialogue do I have? I have no common ground. How can two walk together except they agree? We don't agree. We don't even have the foundation for an agreement. It's folly to talk about dialogue. Unless, of course, you're going to avoid the truth entirely. That's what the global religion is all about. That's what Rome's global religion is all about. The truth is completely ignored. We're not going to focus on anything that divides us anymore. You know, I've been accused more than once by church-going Christians to be a divider rather than a uniter. Well, you're dividing the brethren. No, God's calling them out. God's calling them out. He's separating the wheat from the chaff. He's separating the tares from the wheat. Truth is the basis of the discussion here at Inquisition Update, not folly, not ecumenism. It's Christ and Him crucified. Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That includes the king at Rome and the king of Saudi Arabia and the king of the United States of America. They don't want to be subject to Jesus Christ. They want to be a God and a law unto themselves. And there are God's people who are not going to be consistent and tolerant of that. They're not going to be compatible with it. They're not going to have dialogue with this global apostasy. This global rebellion that looks so much like the incidents of the Tower of Babel that it's unbelievable. Uniting all the religions of the world to rebel against Christ. That's what the New World Order is all about. That's what the papacy's all about. He said the Pope conceptualized a new approach toward Islam that fall, as Cardinal Turan told me when I saw him in September. Intent on forging closer relations, Benedict decided to focus on areas in which both religions shared views, such as the sanctity of life, culture, and human needs. The Pope's new approach would start with the 10 Commandments. Imagine the very 10-point indictment I mean, if you could take the 10 Commandments, read each and every one of the 10 Commandments, and then think to yourself, which law, which world leader does this law indict? The first commandment. Which world leader does this law condemn? The second commandment. And go right on down the list, and your answer would be the papacy in every count. Leading the whole world to sin against Christ. And yet the Pope dares, in spite of the visible facts, dares to use the 10 Commandments. Oh, did you hear the Pope's going to use the 10 Commandments as the foundation for the new religious order? Yeah, isn't that great? The whole world buys the lie. The whole world can't comprehend that the 10 Commandments is a 10-count indictment against the papacy. It applies to the papacy. It was written as though it were intended for the papacy as an indictment. The Pope's new approach would start with the 10 Commandments, a foundational text for all three Abrahamic faiths. Oh, they're going to call Judaism, Christianity, and Islam Abrahamic faiths. That's blasphemy. Abraham worshiped the God of gods. Abraham never tipped his hat nor bent his knee to any other god but God. And there's only one God. I am God. There is none like me. That's the one Abraham served. To dare call the Abrahamic faith Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is blasphemy. You know who the Trinity is for the New World Order? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Stop and think about it. Rome's about to ready to redefine the Trinity. Jesus is going to have to share his throne with Judaism and Islam. You can't get more deceived, more deluded, more confounded. And to preach against it is to divide rather than unite? Give me a break. He says, from this common ground, Benedict would seek greater rapport. Quote, it just might work, unquote, Cardinal Taran said, with an air of someone who has seen so much to expect miracles, but never stopped praying and hoping for them. They're calling it a miracle that Judaism, Christianity, that is Roman Catholicism, and Islam should be united. They're calling it a miracle. And obviously we're to expect that that miracle comes from God, not on your life. He says those last months in Rome, as we waited for Dr. Glendon to pass through the nomination and confirmation process, were punctuated with farewell receptions and holiday parties. Our time in Rome had brought us many new friends, and I enjoyed warm relations with many Vatican officials and a number of my fellow diplomats. One diplomat, Nikolai Sedjikov, the ambassador from Russia. Oh yes, Russia has an ambassador with the Antichrist, just like the rest of the nations of the world. Told me I would be missed because I was, quote, not on a leash, unquote. I took this as high praise. While I had duly and completely executed all directives from the State Department, I had also tried to generate new ideas and measures to advance and leverage our relationship with the Holy See. Got to make our relationship just as tight as possible with the Antichrist. He says, I joined my fellow members of the diplomatic corps in the Sala Regia one last time in early January of 2008 to hear the Pope's annual address. Got to hear the Pope speak at least once a year. Just like when the kingdom will have to go up to the Passover once a year. Got to hear the Pope speak once a year in the New World Order. He says, though pro forma in some respects, the Pope's speech was packed, as always, with meaningful insights. Quote, the factors of concern are varied, yet they all bear witness to the fact that human freedom is not absolute, but is a good that is shared, one for which all must assume responsibility, the Pope said. Did you get that? Let me read it again. Listen carefully. See if you can understand what he's saying. The factors of concern are varied, yet they all bear witness to the fact that human freedom is not absolute, but is a good that is shared, one for which all must assume responsibility. He is likening human freedom to a good that is a commodity, just like beans, just like bread, just like cattle, just like furniture and cars. It's a good. In other words, it is to be bought and sold. It is to be given and taken away. That's what human rights are. And isn't that what the papacy has always taught? That the human rights come from the Pope, and if he gives you your human rights, he can take them away. That's Roman Catholic canon law. He's simply confirming Roman Catholic canon law. He says the factors of concern are varied, yet they all bear witness to the fact that human freedom is not absolute. Your freedom can be taken away from you. Because the Pope gives it, he can take it away. And your freedom, that is freedom wherever you think it's found in the world, it's like a commodity that is shared. Nobody owns it, is what he's saying. Nobody owns freedom. It has to be shared. It has to be distributed. It has to be taken from some and given to others. Do you know that the commodity that you most love in this country, called freedom, the greatest free nation in the world, is being taken away from you and given to someone else? Who do you suspect might be taking away your liberty and giving it to someone else? The Pope. Caritas in veritate. Charity and truth. Who is truth, according to the papacy? The Pope. Charity in the name of the Pope. That's what veritas and caritate means. He's going to redistribute your wealth, and your wealth includes your freedom. We're all going to be enslaved to the papacy. That's what the New World Order is. That's what this whole book is about. Are you happy with that? I'll be back tomorrow.